Hey guys, this is Paul at Yaw Power. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Kawasaki KRX and Honda Talon Coil on Plug ignition upgrade kits. I've been meaning to do this video for a long time. I keep coming up with excuses. I need to make a list of what I'm going to talk about, script it a little bit so I don't sound like a moron, get a haircut, clean my desk, whatever. I'm out of excuses. I just need to get it done. So I'm going to let it rip. If I say anything stupid, I'll edit it out in the comments later. Unless it's just a little bit stupid, then I might leave it. Not every product is a hit. We got lucky on this one, struck gold, so to speak, and it's very quickly become the go-to for high performance builds in both the Honda Talon and the Kawasaki KRX market. So we get a lot of questions, and surprisingly, the questions amount to what else do I need to do? Well, you don't need to do anything other than install the coils as described in the instructions and update the dwell values. But there is one thing I'd like you to do while you're in there. You've got everything apart. Put fresh plugs in it. And don't close the gap. Run a stock gap, and I'll explain why that's critical later. Most of you who are using this kit are doing it because you were running high boost, high compression ratio, or maybe a combination of the two, and you were suffering from misfires, so you've closed up the gap. And you had to do that because you didn't have sufficient voltage to jump the gap with the cylinder pressure that you had. That's no longer a problem. And in fact, we've been telling people that you can run 30 pounds of boost without issue with a stock plug gap. And then someone apparently took that as a challenge and did exactly that and found out that that was the case. So leave the gap stock. And to make sure you don't screw that up putting it in, if you have a spark plug socket that holds onto the spark plug, it's very easy to lower it down in and thread it in. But I've seen the mistake numerous times where people will drop the plug down into the well, and then it hits the ground strap and closes up the gap. So if you don't have a socket that hangs on tightly to the spark plug, use a piece of fuel line or something like that. You can even use the coils that we provide. The boot fits on there kind of tight. You can put it on just a little way and use that to lower the spark plug down in and get it started on the thread. So the only thing you need to do, other than following the instructions and updating the dwell values, is of course to put in some new plugs and leave them at stock gap. It's really that simple. So the rest of this is going to be about where the performance increase comes from, and I'm going to try to give you a bit of an education on how this works, why it works, things you should know about to make further sense of what you're doing when you put these coils in. So I'm already babbling. Lots of editing. So I do have a short list over here. It's not a good one. I'll work from it, see what I can do. The first thing we need to talk about is voltage. It's important to know that the higher the pressure in the cylinder, the higher or the more voltage is required to jump the gap. And if you take a look at the screen here, this is an actual cylinder pressure trace from one of our test vehicles. It's a stock Honda Talon. And this is at the torque peak, which will have the highest cylinder pressure. And I have the cursor here set to, let's say, 30 degrees, which is about where the spark plug fires in this case. And you can see that the pressure in the cylinder is about 11.5 bar. Roughly, that's going to be 160, 165 psi. And the stock plug will fire that without issue. But keep in mind that with boost, it's easy to double that or more. Maybe 15, 20 pounds of boost will double that. We've got guys going beyond that, running as much as 2 atmospheres of boost. And a compression ratio can raise that as well. If you go to an extreme, we had a customer running 14.5 to 1 compression. That'll raise the pressure at this point by about 50%. So you very quickly get to the point where the stock system does not have enough voltage to fire the gap. And that's really what prompted us to build this kit in the first place. What else did I want to go over? Briefly, if it's not clear, if you close up the gap, it requires less voltage to jump the gap, and that's why people have found that reducing the gap is required under boost. And so the other question is, if it's just a matter of voltage, why run a larger gap? Well, the reason is that the mixture inside of the engine, I mean the mix of air and fuel, is not homogeneous, meaning it's not nicely mixed. You don't have a cloud of air and fuel in there that is the perfect air-fuel ratio. What you've got is gobs of droplets in some cases, fuel that hasn't vaporized yet, that doesn't burn at all because only the vapors will burn once they're mixed with air. And then you've got rich pockets and lean pockets, and this is all swirling around in the chamber at 100 miles an hour. Who knows exactly? But a longer gap basically gives you a longer piece of lightning, right? And so if you were to double the gap, the spark distance, of course, or the length of the spark would double, and you have a greater likelihood of coming in contact with an ignitable portion of the mixture. Now, the reason that's critical is that every fuel, it doesn't matter what it is, gasoline, alcohol-based fuels, they have a characteristic called range of flammability. And what that means is that if the mixture is too rich, it won't fire. If the mixture is too lean, it won't fire. And you get this window, this fairly narrow window of air-fuel ratio that's required to have an ignitable mixture. And again, because it's not a homogeneous mix, you've got just chaos inside of the cylinder. What you find is that a longer gap or a larger gap will give you a better chance of grabbing a portion of ignitable mixture and getting the fire set. So short story, don't tighten up the gap, put in a fresh set of plugs and let it rip. So let's talk about energy. Now there's another quality that every fuel has, which is called the minimum ignition energy. And the units are the amount of energy required to ignite a given mass of that air-fuel mixture. And this varies among fuels, but the point is that it takes a certain amount of energy to get the fire lit. And so if you're trying to start a fire, whether it's a bonfire or the air fuel inside of the cylinder, do you want to do that with a match, or do you want to do it with a fucking blowtorch, right? So essentially that's what we're talking about here. Now these coils from memory have an energy output that's approximately twice that of the stock coils, maybe 2.5. I don't remember exactly. I'm sorry I didn't prepare well enough for this. But it really comes down to that. You're going to start a fire. You can do it with a torch or you can do it with a match. Well, obviously things are going to go better and work much better for you if you do it with high energy. So we want to burn the fuel as quickly as we possibly can. I mean, as fast as we possibly can. And so if I bring this up, let's see. This screen capture is the heat release for a single cycle in our Honda Talon engine at its torque peak. And essentially what you can see over here to the left, hopefully you can see my cursor, is that we have zero energy release at 30 degrees before top dead center. That's about where we fire the plug. Nothing happens for a while. It takes a while to get things going, just like if you're starting your bonfire. And then at about 25 degrees, we start to see some heat release, and that means that the fuel is burning and obviously releasing heat into the chamber. And what you'll find is that at optimum ignition timing, and this is dialed in for optimum timing, by the time we get to 30 degrees after top dead center, it's all done. Everything is burned, or at least almost everything is burned. It happens very quickly, and we need that to happen quickly. The reason for this is that the energy in the fuel comes in the form of heat, right? And so we put heat in, it increases the pressure in the cylinder, presses the piston down, we get all that. But the thing to keep in mind is that the temperature inside of the chamber is really quite high, and a lot of that heat energy is being lost to, what the fuck was that? A large portion of the heat energy is being lost to the cooling jacket, the oil if your pistons are oil cooled. And so the entire time that this process is happening and creating pressure inside of the cylinder, a great deal of it is being lost to the cooling system. So we want to get it done as quick as we possibly can. And from memory, I think about 30% of the heat energy put into an engine gets lost into the oil, into the cooling jacket. And the longer we let that sit in there before it does any useful work, the less power we're going to have. And so to give you an idea, let's look at cylinder pressure here. Cylinder pressure at 30 degrees before top dead center. The spark plug is fired, but nothing's happening yet. And it's about 11.5 bar, again, about 165 PSI, as I described earlier. Now, the fact that we're building pressure before top dead center is really not a problem because we get that pressure back. So if you were to compress the air in the cylinder, it's not wasted because as soon as you release the force, it presses the cylinder back out. Now, in a perfect world, we would get all that energy back. But as I mentioned, we have heat loss. So when we compress that mixture in the cylinder, it generates a lot of heat. And on a 9.5 to 1 compression ratio engine, I think I made a note of this. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We would have to go all the way to top dead center. I had a screen capture for that. Let me do that just for the sake of this explanation. Here's a screen capture at about 9,000 RPM, and the engine's on the rev limiter. So the fuel's been shut off. So what we're seeing here is just pressurized due to the air that we brought in and compressed. And so the pressure is about 22 bar, which is, oh man, let me see. How many PSI is that? Let's just say 285 PSI maybe. But here's the critical thing. The temperature at this point would be about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can compress it and let go of it and expect it to spring back and give you that energy back. But if we were to compress it and hold it, what would happen is that air that's in there at about 600 degrees is going to dissipate that energy into the cooling jacket, into the comparatively cooler aluminum and steel around it. And if we hold it long enough, it will eventually reach atmospheric, or it'll eventually reach its initial temperature. Now, the entire time that the temperature is going down, the pressure is going down as well. And ultimately what happens is when we let go of that and allow the pressure to push the piston back down, the amount of energy that we get out of that is a small fraction of what we would have had we done it instantly where there was no heat loss. So you might be thinking, well, who gives a shit? There's no fire in the cylinder, right? This is not really relevant to what I'm doing. It is relevant because it helps describe the process of heat loss and how heat loss reduces power. And I use that, of course, as an example to explain why we want to burn the fuel as fast as we possibly can. Again, back to the heat release issue here, or heat release graph here, we see that 50% of the mixture roughly is burned by about 6 degrees after top dead center. Things happen very quickly. If we were to go from, let's just say, 10 degrees, 10% burned to 90% burned, which is the indicator that we use for burn rate, takes in the neighborhood of 22 crank degrees. Happens very quickly. We want it to happen as quickly as possible. The more quickly and more efficiently we can get the fire started, the more quickly the mixture is going to burn. Boy, I murdered that, didn't I? This is why I've been putting this off, because I wanted to plan it and script it a little bit. So hopefully that was clear and easy to understand. Simply a high energy spark with a long duration and a relatively long length is going to get the fire started and get it to burn through the chamber faster. And of course, the result of that is less heat loss and more power. Duration, spark duration. These coils have a pretty long duration spark, which is also beneficial for the same reason that I described before. We have a non-homogeneous mixture moving through that spark gap at all times. So if that spark is firing for 10 milliseconds instead of 5 milliseconds, we have twice as much time to expose that heat energy from the spark to the fuel and get it burning and get it burned as quickly as possible. So the reason the Honda Talon comes with a relatively weak ignition system is it works pretty well on a stock vehicle. The benefits of increased spark energy, voltage, and duration, that all comes about under less than ideal conditions. And so the question is, what would be less than ideal conditions? Well, high cylinder pressure for one. Having a lot of liquid in the chamber, like if we're running alcohol-based fuels. I mentioned that the minimum ignition energy requirement for a fuel is dependent on the mass of fuel. So if we're running like methanol, for instance, instead of gasoline, we find that there's a much greater mass of fuel there. It's a little bit harder to get it lit. And so that's one instance where additional ignition energy is really going to pay off. Now, another thing to consider is anytime there's high residual content. So residual content is a description of how much exhaust gas is mixed in with a fresh intake charge. And it's always there to some degree, and it's a variable depending on a number of different things. So let's consider part throttle. you're rolling through the pits, for instance, at the racetrack at 15 miles an hour. Maybe you don't do that often. You don't care about it too much, but you probably care when you're out on the trails, that type of thing. You have vacuum in the intake manifold. And so imagine when the piston is at top dead center during the overlap period, right before it starts its intake stroke. The overlap period is when both the intake and exhaust valves are both open at the same time for a small amount of time. So we've got vacuum in the intake, we've got roughly atmospheric pressure in the exhaust, and so we're literally sucking exhaust gases out of the exhaust system and up into the chamber. And so a large portion of the contents of the cylinder at that point, by the time the piston gets to bottom dead center at the end of its draw, a large portion of that mixture is exhaust gases. Now, exhaust gases reduce the range of flammability, which makes the mixture harder to fire. This is also, by the way, responsible for the rough idle quality that comes with big cams. One of the things that happens with big cams is you have a much greater overlap period, and so there's less flow restriction between the intake and exhaust during the overlap period, and it can draw a much greater amount of exhaust gases in. And that's what causes the rough idle. It's caused by high exhaust gas dilution, which narrows the range of flammability of the mixture. And on one cycle, it may be a nice ignitable mixture in there. On the other cycle, it may not, and that's what causes the rough idle. There are a few other things that affect the residual content that you might not know about. One is compression ratio, and let's consider two engines, one with a compression ratio of say 14:1 and the other with a compression ratio of 10:1. Now, the way we achieve that increased compression ratio is by decreasing the volume of the combustion chamber. And so even with high overlap cams that are scavenging well, we're not able to clear all of the exhaust gases out of the chamber. So on every cycle, when the piston goes down in the cylinder to draw in fresh charge, there's an amount of spent exhaust gases in the chamber. A low compression ratio engine, which is typical in boost applications, particularly high boost applications, is going to have a larger chamber volume, and so there's going to be a greater amount of residual exhaust gases mixed in with your fresh charge. The other thing that can create a problem is high exhaust back pressure with turbo systems. It's not uncommon at high boost to have exhaust back pressure that's higher than your intake boost pressure. And as you can imagine, of course, that increases the mass of exhaust gases in the chamber. And then the other thing that happens, and it really shows up on this Talon, for instance, particularly in cylinder number 1, which has the worst exhaust port, is that at high RPM, it's very hard to fully evacuate the cylinder. And so this trace here, this is maybe a little hard to understand, but I'm just going to breeze through it and show you what's critical. If you can follow my cursor, well, first of all, this is cylinder pressure, okay, versus cylinder volume. Now, if we look at the trace here, what we see, if you follow my cursor, this is the compression phase, and then once the spark plug fires, the pressure builds, and then we get over here, the piston's moving down in the cylinder, the pressure is decreasing, and then where these curves start to trend downward is where the exhaust valve opens. So the pressure goes down as the chamber volume decreases because the piston's going down, dumps the exhaust gases, and you can see here that momentarily the pressure is even below atmospheric. And by the time we get back to the end of the cycle here at top dead center, we find that the pressure in the chamber is approximately equal to atmospheric, and there's slight variations from cycle to cycle, but you get the idea. Now, this is at 3,000 RPM, the bottom of the test range. As I increase RPM and it becomes harder and harder for the exhaust gases to exit the chamber due to the restriction from the muffler, small exhaust valves, hopefully that's done. I'm going to increase the RPM, watch the speed trace up here, and then watch what happens as I increase the RPM. Now you can see that the pressure during this portion of the cycle, which is what we call the blowdown period, where the piston is coming back up in the cylinder, the pressure keeps rising higher and higher and higher because it's getting harder and harder to exhaust the chamber, obviously. Now by the time we get to let's see, what do we got here? 8,700 RPM. You can see that when we get back to top dead center at the end of the cycle, when we should have fully exhausted the cylinder, we still have pressure here that's, well, I can find out from the cursor. We have pressure that's 1.2, well, let's call it about 1.2 bar. That's about 20 to 25% higher than atmospheric pressure. So what that's telling us is that we have high pressure exhaust gases or higher than atmospheric pressure exhaust gases left in the chamber before we even start the intake stroke. And so this, of course, also results in increased residual content. So I think I've covered that all. Bad exhaust ports, high exhaust back pressure due to a restrictive exhaust system, or just the operation of your turbo, compression ratio, vacuum in the intake. I think that covers all of that, so I'll move on to the next. So everyone asks about power. What kind of power increase should I expect? Well, it's very dependent on the application. And so on our test vehicle, which is completely stock with the exception of the fuel system and a lot of measuring equipment, we found a whopping 1 horsepower increase, right? So why would you put a coil kit on a stock car? Well, I don't think any of the coil kits that we've sold have gone onto a stock vehicle. I will tell you that in addition to that whopping 1 horsepower increase, we had a tremendous improvement in drivability, engine smoothness, throttle response. So for those of you running a stock Talon, it may be worth it, especially considering the price. It's a pretty expensive product. But on some boosted applications, even low power applications, 7-8 pounds of boost, we've seen as much as a 3.5% increase in power. The interesting thing about this is that in a market where horsepower sells, horsepower numbers sell, we've been selling the hell out of these things without posting any horsepower numbers and without anybody else posting them for that matter. In fact, we even had a customer buy 3 sets. Apparently they liked them a lot and they put them on all their vehicles. Now that I think about it, I believe we've had 2 customers that have bought 3 sets and 1 customer who's bought 2 sets. So we're very careful about not stating horsepower increases because it's so application dependent, and quite frankly because most posted horsepower numbers are just bullshit anyway. We can play around on the dyno without making any changes other than engine temperature, water temperature, oil temperature, and on a, let's just say, a 100 horsepower engine, we can move the power around 5 horsepower in either direction quite easily. And that's without even intentionally fudging the numbers. So we've abstained from posting horsepower numbers for those reasons. The one other thing I would like to mention is that if you look at the dwell values in your stock ECU, you'll find that at idle, on the Kawasaki, oddly, the coil is overdwelled, meaning it's drawing more current than it should and just generating heat. On the Honda Talon, it's about correct down at low speed, but there's a very noticeable thing there, which is that the tables list coil dwell versus RPM. And the reason for that is that the stock coils have very high resistive losses, and so they generate a lot of heat both in the coil and in the circuitry that drives them. And so to keep from destroying components, overheating coils, drive transistors, that type of thing, they back the dwell down at high RPM. So many of you running boost have noticed that you don't have misfire issues at low RPM, you have those issues at high RPM. The reason is that the factory has backed off the ignition coil, the dwell value, which is what determines the ignition energy. They backed it off at high RPM to keep from damaging things. These coils have very low resistive losses. We're able to charge them fully all the way up to 10,000 RPM without issue. And so that solves 2 problems. One, it has greater ignition energy all the time during starting, low RPM, but also a far greater increase in ignition energy and voltage capability at high RPM compared to the stock coils, and that goes for the Kawasaki and the Honda Talon. Oh, cycle-to-cycle variation. That's something I'd like to discuss as well. So on my screen here, I've got, let's just take cylinder pressure. This is cylinder pressure measured in cylinder number 1 and 2 on our stock Honda Talon. At this case, if I look, yeah, that's right at the torque peak. Now, you'll notice that these 2 curves are not the same, meaning these 2 cylinders they're not responding the same. But here's what I want you to see. I want you to see what happens from one cycle to the next. And this goes back to the description of having a non-homogeneous mixture. Now keep in mind this is not atypical what I'm showing you, and in fact this is with the upgraded coils. I'm going to change a cycle at a time so you can see the difference. So this is, cycle 8429. I'm going to click to the next cycle. See the difference there? Next cycle, some strong ones, one really weak one. Those two are nearly identical, which happens every once in a while because it's a very random process. I'm just going to keep clicking through, and you get a feel for how random the combustion process is. So in this case, we don't have any misfires. A misfire would be, no increase in cylinder pressure due to combustion, but this is very typical for cycle-to-cycle variation between, from one cycle to the next. So if I scroll a little faster, you really get a better feel for it. This is a low RPM where the cylinder pressure is low. Oh no, actually that was where I was off the throttle. Here I'm on the throttle, low RPM. Whoops, it's just moving too fast. I don't have enough resolution here. So I'll click through one at a time to show you the difference cycle to cycle. And again, this is all caused by the mixture burning at a different rate. If I go back to the heat release integral, we'll see the same thing. There are big differences from cycle to cycle. And again, mostly this comes down to the fact that we have a non-homogeneous mixture. This is always the case in a running engine. Any engine with cylinder pressure sensors that you look at will have variation. And having a high energy ignition system will always reduce this variation, which is why people running the kits note an increase in engine smoothness, or decrease in engine roughness, if you want to put it that way. The reason is that the burn is much more consistent from one cycle to the next.